y'all, Dixie here. I've had quite a few of y'all ask about the cost of summiting Mount Kilimanjaro, so today I want to tell you all about that. Of course, the cost of any trip is going to vary from person to person based on their preferences, also where they're traveling from, etc. But I can at least share with you what everything cost me so you have a ballpark figure. The first thing you should know is you must have a guide to go with you up Mount Kilimanjaro. It's not something you can set out on your own. Choosing a guide company can be a little overwhelming. There are a lot of options out there, and this will also vary based on the country that you're coming from and who you're booking with. For example, there are companies based here in the US. There are also local tour companies in Tanzania, but I'm sure the local companies are also able to speak English and deal with whatever clients are interested in booking through them. Other than what country you're based in, some of the other things that you might consider when choosing a guide company might be the cost of the package. But there are other things to consider that will affect the price. Like, do you want to go on a private guided tour or do you want to go on a group trip? Going with a group will help reduce the cost of the individual, of course, but you might want to be alone and not have to deal with people every day in and out other than your guides. You should also look at what is included in the package for the price that you're paying. Are you going to have decent food? Are you going to have a private toilet tent? Are those things important to you? I definitely recommend looking at reviews. Unfortunately, there are scammers out there that try to take advantage of people, so you want to make sure that you're booking with a reputable company. Something else that will affect the cost of your trip is how many days you're going to be on the mountain. You want to make sure that the route you want to take and the number of days that you prefer to be out there, that the company you go with actually offers that as a trip. And I feel like most of them will. But I preferred to go with a longer trip, which of course is going to cost more money because they're supporting me for more days. I picked the 10-day Lemosho route, and this is actually 8 days on the mountain. They just call it 10 days because they put you up in a hotel the day before you summit and you stay the night after you finish your trip. Being on the mountain more days is definitely a contributing factor to success rate. If you're out there more days before you summit, you have time to acclimate. And because I'm coming from an elevation of 700 to 800 feet here in Opelika, Alabama, then it made sense for me to book a longer trip. And while it was more money, it was worth it to me because I would have hated to spend a significant amount of money anyway, have less days on the mountain, and then not be successful because I didn't acclimate in time. Also, with a longer trip, you get to see more of the mountain and the wilderness in Tanzania, and that's something that was definitely important to me. We got to camp one night in the forest, and I heard monkeys serenading me all night long. Now, for some people that might freak them out, but I love stuff like that. So getting to camp in all of the different zones and see more of the mountain was also important to me, but it might not be to you. Some people can't take that many days off to go on this type of adventure, or they don't have the funds, so they have to go with a shorter trip. Again, it's all tailored to the individual. And finally, something that I didn't consider when I was booking that I definitely would if I were going on this type of trip in the future is the treatment of the porters. I want to make sure that I'm giving my money to a company that treats their porters well, that makes sure that they're taken care of and they have what they need to also be successful and comfortable on the mountain. And one thing that I learned from the guides and porters on this trip is that when COVID hit and people were out of work for a long period of time, Peak Planet still took care of their people, and that's something that they were really proud of, and I could tell that they had some sort of loyalty to this company. So that's definitely something that I would look at, how the company treats their guides and porters. The cost of my trip through Peak Planet with the group setting was $2,899. That trip package is not the end of what you will spend for guiding services though. There are also tips that you should consider and budget for because the guides and the porters are the ones that make the trip and make it possible for you to summit. So they do get paid a certain amount from the company, but they also expect, and in my opinion, very much deserve tips. The way that the tipping works is at the end of the trip, after you've received your services, on the last day, either the night before the last day of hiking or the morning before, there's typically some sort of come together by the group and everyone discusses how much they think each person should be tipped. And there was a range that was provided to us by the company. You know, this type of porter typically earns from this amount to this amount. So as a group, because we thought everybody did such a fantastic job, we decided to tip on the highest end of the range. So my portion of the tipping for our group was $480. Another thing to think about is if you want any add-on adventures. A lot of these companies, I feel like probably all of them, will offer a discounted rate if you do an additional journey like a safari or Zanzibar. When I was on the way to the mountain and I saw zebras and like a giraffe, unfortunately I didn't get a great shot of that. At that point I realized, man, I really made a mistake not booking a safari, but unfortunately time frame just didn't work for that for me. So I do plan to go back and do a safari in the future, and I've heard that Zimbabwe is the place to do it, but that is a way to save money if that's something you plan on doing at some point in your life anyway. Next, you got to think about travel costs. I went with Qatar Airlines and I flew from Atlanta, Georgia to Doha, Qatar on about a 16-hour flight. Had a layover where I got to explore a little bit. Little bonus tip here, you can get a 30-day visa right there at customs in Doha if you have a long layover there and you want to go explore. And then the flight from Doha to Tanzania was about 6 hours. Now on that extended flight, the long flight, 16 hours, I paid extra for legroom in both directions, going there and returning. So that was about $300 extra that you could cut off from the price that I paid. But if you're coming from somewhere that's closer to Tanzania, then you're gonna save on flight costs anyway. But my total trip cost for flight and shuttle back from the airport, because my mama drove me there when I flew out, was about $2,500. If you end up getting the medications that a lot of these guide companies recommend, then you'll have a prescription for traveler's diarrhea, for a malaria medication called Malarone, and then Diamox to help with going to higher elevations. All of these meds probably cost me $50 or less using a good RX prescription card. Of course, you may have insurance, so that price could vary, but that's an idea anyway. Another thing you should budget for is eating. You will have food while you're on the mountain. It's expected that the company that you book with will feed you while you're out there. And also Peak Planet put us up at the Stella Marie Lodge, and they fed us complimentary breakfast the day before our trek and the morning after. But any lunches, dinners, or food at the airport, most of the airlines will keep you fed in flight. But anything extra will be something that you should cover. The total amount that I spent on extra food is about $150. I would say that you should also budget a little extra if you're wanting to explore a nearby town at all, or for tipping hotel staff, souvenirs, you know, just a little nest egg to keep to the side for things that you might not think of beforehand. I took a shuttle or taxi that the hotel called for us to Moshi just to explore, bought some souvenirs for the family, had some coffee, etc. The hotel staff was also incredible, carried our bags up to the room, was very accommodating, so we made sure to tip them too. For all of this extra stuff, I spent about $135. One required cost for me was travel insurance. I opted to go with worldnomads.com. I also used them when I went to do the Camino with my sister. I like that you can just pay for a policy online and they lay everything out very plainly. Some companies may not require trip insurance. I feel like most of them probably will, but it's a good idea anyway because a lot of things can go wrong and they cover you for so many things. There's typically a standard option and an explorer option with World Nomads, and the cost difference wasn't extreme when I was looking at the two options. It was $77 versus $135. So what made me go with the explorer option is they cover trip cancellation for up to $10,000, where the standard plan covered for much less and wouldn't have reimbursed me for everything I spent for this trip if something were to happen to where I wasn't able to go. But if you are pinching pennies and you're willing to take the risk and you want to save some money and go with the standard plan, they do cover hiking and trekking up to 19,685 feet, which covers going up to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro. So my total cost out of pocket for trip insurance was $135. Now let's talk about gear. This will be different for every person and will vary wildly depending on what you already have at home. If you're into the outdoors and you've been hiking before, then chances are you have a lot of what you need already. All of the gear that I took with me, if I had started from ground zero, would probably have cost me somewhere around $2,500. But even with the gear that I took, not all of it was necessary. For example, most of the people that went on this trek slept on the sleeping pad or the foam mat that was provided to them in the tent, where I opted to buy an additional sleeping pad that I didn't have before for $200. So right there, that could save somebody a couple $100 bucks. Also, this $2,500 estimate is including a pair of trail runners, a pair of tennis shoes, and you probably already have some of that again at home. But for those of y'all who are lacking some of the gear that you feel like you need, and by the way, I have done a gear video on everything I took to Mount Kilimanjaro. If you want to check that out, I'll link it in the video description of this video. But if you're missing any pieces of gear, one way you can save money is to rent from the guide company you go with. I ended up renting a pair of hiking breeches, and those cost me 20 bucks to rent, where if I had bought them brand new, it would probably been somewhere between $75 to $100. So even if you have nothing, if you're not planning on going on more trips like this in the future, it might be cheaper to rent what you need. All right, so the grand total of the cost of the trip plus the gear, if I had bought everything starting at ground zero, would be around $8,850. For the trip itself, without the cost of gear, what I paid out of pocket is around $6,350. I can confidently say that the experience of the trip and summiting Mount Kilimanjaro is valuable enough to me that it was worth the money that I spent. But I can definitely say that it was not a good business investment. But it's one of those things that is a bucket list item, and being able to say that I've stood at the highest point in the continent of Africa is something that I'll never forget. All right, y'all, that is all I have for you today. If you've got any questions about the cost of a trip to summit Mount Kilimanjaro, please feel free to leave those in the comments below. Thank y'all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe before you go, and we will see y'all next time.